Hey, what's up? My name is Elena and today I'm going to be reviewing 6 different habit books. Which ones were worth the read, which ones weren't, and how to know which of these books might be best for you. Now, obviously, if you clicked on this video, then you are probably interested in setting up a new habit or two, and while reading a book won't necessarily accomplish that for you, I am a big reader, and I've been reading a lot of personal development, self-help style books over the past number of many years. And if you read the right one at the right time, it can truly, not to be dramatic, but change your life. So let's get into it. And just so you know, I'm gonna be going through these books in the order that I read them in, just because I feel like the order that you read the books in can kind of influence how you would rate them or your reviews of them, especially if they're all about a certain topic. So I'm just putting that out there. The first habit book I ever read was Better Than Before by Gretchen Rubin. Obviously, you can see I took a lot of notes, highlighted a bunch, sticky noted a bunch, and that's because there was a ton of really practical, easy to apply strategies and techniques in the book. Whether you are looking to make new habits or even break old ones, this book is just loaded with ideas for how you can do that. Obviously, not every single strategy in the book is going to be right for every single habit you have, but that's what makes it so great, is that you can kind of read them all, know what they are, and then pick and choose the ones that are going to work for you or work for this specific habit and try them out. And because there's so many, you're just practically guaranteed to walk away with at least something that can help you on your habit journey. There's also a lot of really good one-liners and quotes that you can take away from the book that kind of summarize some of the key concepts and ideas and mindset shifts. Now, I will say I read this book many years ago, but one thing that I still remember about it is that a lot of the examples that she offers in the book and the stories that she uses, there was definitely a theme of dieting and calorie counting and exercise. Not that there's anything wrong with that. A lot of it was, of course, based on the author's own experience, so I guess if that's where a lot of her focus is, then that's what she's going to write about. But eventually it did just feel like a little much. So that's just something to be aware of. But the content about habit strategies itself is really good. So I give it an 8.5 out of 10. Would recommend. Book number 2 is The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. I really enjoyed this. The first section really breaks down individual habits, the psychology and the research behind them of how they're formed, how they work, and goes really into depth on the experiments that were actually done. So you know not only what were the outcomes of these studies, but how did they actually get to that conclusion. Of all the books on this list, this one is probably the one that provides the most solid foundation of the psychology of habits and how they work. But obviously, if you're not as much of a psychology nerd as I am, then maybe you'd find that part boring, but I really liked it. Another unique piece that this book addresses that no other book on this list does is that it talks about habits outside of the context of just an individual perspective. Part 1 of the book is focused on individual habits, but then part 2 and 3 are focused on the habits of organizations and habits of societies as a whole. So if you're a leader at a company or organization or in a community of some sort, or you manage teams, or you just want to understand how habits work at a larger scale, this could be a really interesting read as well. One thing I will say is that I feel like this is definitely one of the less practical books on this list in terms of offering specific strategies and techniques and stuff like that. So it's definitely very informational, but I don't know how much practically you would necessarily get out of it. So 7 out of 10, I would recommend, especially if you're interested in learning more about the kind of research and background of habits, and if you're interested about learning about habits beyond an individual scale. Book number 3 is Atomic Habits by James Clear. Now, if you have even dipped a toe into the world of personal development, you have probably at least heard of this book at some point along your journey, if not already have read it. There is so much hype about this book, and honestly, it deserves the hype. It does a really great job of striking a balance between the science and background of certain concepts, the mindset shifts, easy to digest quotes to summarize the main points. It has a clear framework of these 4 laws of habit formation based on the habit loop. It's easy to follow and offers a lot of really great practical tips and strategies that you can use based on those 4 laws. There's also illustrations throughout the book so that you can easily follow along and understand and visualize certain concepts. As you can see, it's also one that I took lots and lots of notes with, and honestly, I don't have anything bad to say about it. I thought it was a really great book. 10 out of 10 would recommend to literally anyone interested in improving their life and their habits. Book number 4 is Good Morning, Good Life by Amy Schmittauer-Landino. Now, Amy is actually a YouTuber as well. I've been watching her for years, back when her niche was like completely different, and I really love her YouTube channel. This book, as the title might suggest, is a lot more focused specifically on building a morning routine rather than any habit overall. So if morning routines or morning habits are something that you are specifically interested in setting up for yourself, then this book might be worth a shot. It really does cover like everything you could think of when it comes to setting up a morning routine, from finding your why to setting boundaries to getting a good night's rest and how to structure your morning routines and what to include in them. Now, I will say that I feel like, I don't know if it's just that I didn't read this book at the right time for me, because at that point I had already kind of figured out how to set up morning routines, or if it's just because I have like watched so many of the author's YouTube videos already that there wasn't much new information that I learned from the book itself. A lot of it just felt very familiar in that sense, and overall it didn't feel super impactful for me the way some of the other books on this list did. So I think I'd give it like a 6.5 out of 10 if I'm being honest, which I feel bad about because I wanted to love it so much, and I truly do love Amy's YouTube channel. Like, it's so good, you should definitely check it out. But I guess I just didn't get as much as I wanted out of the book, and like I said, it could have been for a number of different reasons. Next up, we've got The Four Tendencies by Gretchen Rubin. And yes, this is the same author of the first book I mentioned, Better Than Before. And actually in Better Than Before, in the first like chapter or so, she talks about these 4 tendencies very briefly. And I guess it was just a concept that really stood out to a lot of people, so she decided to expand on it and write a whole book about it. Now, these 4 tendencies are kind of like these different personality profiles that we can have. And while the book itself isn't specifically about habits, I feel like habits is probably one of the most practical applications of this idea of the 4 tendencies. And I found it really helpful in understanding myself, why I do things, why I resist certain things when it comes to habits, and also how other people might be different than me in setting up their habits. Because yes, while there is a scientific basis for how habits are formed for all of us, there's also a lot of different types of people in the world, and what works for one person isn't necessarily going to work for another. And these 4 personality types are basically different ways that we can relate to inner or outer expectations. So for example, I'm a questioner, which means that I uphold inner expectations but resist outer expectations. And setting up habits for me is going to be really different than for someone who is, for example, an obliger, someone that resists inner expectations but meets outer expectations. That's someone who might rely a lot on things like accountability, whereas for myself, accountability isn't really going to make or break a habit for me, but whether or not I'm personally interested in that habit really will. So that's just a small example, but as you get into the book, you can learn a lot more about not only your habits, but how to maybe even help others with habits. One thing to know is that they're not, scientifically validated personality types. They are just her own personal observations. But regardless, I do think they are interesting observations and can be helpful. So I'd give it a 7 out of 10. It wouldn't really be my top pick for a habits book necessarily, but if you're looking for another way to approach habits or just lifestyle changes in general, could definitely be an interesting one. And finally, we've got Badass Habits by Jen Sincero. If I'm being honest, there really wasn't much I took away or enjoyed about this book. I don't know if that's maybe just because I read it after 5 other books on habits that it's kind of really hard to add anything new to the table at this point, but this is also, I believe, the most recently published book of the ones on this list, so you would think if it was most recently published it would have something new to add, but yeah, I just don't know if it was really that helpful. I will say it did have some interesting mindset shifts, and if you are into the whole You Are a Badass series and all of Jen Sincero's other books, then maybe you'll really relate to this one just because of the way she writes and her style. But in general, I'd honestly probably give it like a 5 out of 10. I wouldn't really recommend it. If you're going to be spending your time, hours of your time reading a book on habits, I wouldn't choose this one. So that's it for today. I would be so curious to hear if you have read any of these books, what you thought of them. Do you agree, disagree with some of my thoughts? And is there another book on habits that you found to be really helpful and impactful for you? If so, leave it in the comments below so we can all check it out. And other than that, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it as always. Please do give this video a like and a subscribe if you're interested in more content about personal development and authentic life design. Other than that, I will see you again next week. Bye.